So what this links into is understanding your position of power. So as a coach, we're often told that as a coach, you're in the position of responsibility, you're in the position of power. And so it's often spoken about in different rounds. What we're talking about here is what type of social power have you set up within your culture, within your training group, within your motivational climate. So there's different types of coach power, and we can use these in order to, again, be more effective with our athletes, no matter whether they are male or female. So we have 6 different bases of social power, and we have legitimate power, for example. So this is based on the perception that someone has the right to prescribe behaviour because they've been elected into a certain position of responsibility. So athletes would expect you as the coach to give them their training session. Otherwise, they wouldn't have you as a coach. So therefore, they are expecting you to give them some type of coaching, some type of feedback. But again, depending on the motivational climate that you've set up, will influence how you then translate that legitimate power. So remembering that males and females will interpret language differently. So you've got that legitimate power, but how do you then use it? How do you communicate it? We then have coercive power, and this is perceived, you believe you have the ability to punish those who don't conform to your ideas and demands. And as you can see, that this would fit more into the ego orientation. But we have to be really careful with this one, because how are we developing the athlete? Are we looking to nurture them? Are we looking to develop them? If we do have, for example, a female that is very traditional within their female form, in terms of they are slower to process emotions, coercive power is going to completely knock, potentially, the motivation, completely knock their confidence, their self-esteem. And so we have to be careful as to how we portray punishment and how we actually implement that. We also have reward power. So this is based on the ability to give positive consequences and move the negative ones. So this is where we, again, would look more at the mastery, and we would look at praising effort, praising overcoming mistakes, etc. It's not to say we're going to completely ignore any weaknesses, for example, but we look at developing the strengths in order to develop confidence, motivation. We also have referent power. So here, we want to please the person who possesses the power. So here is where we really have to look at our athlete and who's in front of us. We might get this more, again, in those people who perhaps might have a little less confidence, people who, for example, put the coach on a pedestal. You just have to be aware of how people see you. They will always do that extra rep, whether or not it's within their best interest to do it. So we have to be careful with this type of power. Expert power, so based on having instinctive knowledge, expertise. So again, there's going to be times where you as the coach have to step up. You have to give that expert knowledge. You have to show them that you know what you're doing, and so that they can have confidence in you. So this is actually really important with perhaps some of those more traditional males who will look to learn new skills. They're very systematic, they're very process orientated, they're very driven. They will want to have faith that you know what you're doing. And so sometimes we have to show that we've got that expert power. Sometimes we actually have to almost dim that down so that we're not quite as intimidating. And so we change our language, we change the way in which we talk to people in order to soften that expert power. We then also have the informational power, and again, relates to how we give that information. How do people take on board our information, and are we giving them the right information at the right time? Are we giving them the right support at the right time? So overall, it's really important to have consistency as your coach. If you had a new person turn up, if a parent came to you and they said, how do I know that you'll be the best coach for me? Have you got a clear philosophy? Have you got a clear, this is who I am as a coach. This is how I approach my coaching. This is where I'm adaptive. This is where I'm not adaptive, so that people know what they're going to get from you. Every now and again, you can throw in that curveball. So if you are very task orientated, every now and again, you can throw in that ego orientation. But it's so unusual, the athletes go, what's going on here? Mix it up. But at the end of the day, they know whether you are that nurturing. They know whether you are the skills orientated coach. Be aware of your meaningful impact. So we can have impact every minute of every coaching session. But how do you make it meaningful? Sometimes giving too much information isn't meaningful. Sometimes giving too little information. So how do we know who's in front of us? For want of a better term, are they a stereotypical male? Are they a stereotypical female? Therefore, how should I give them information? How much space should I give them to process information? So as coaches, think about what, how, when, where you talk to athletes, so that you can be effective in that instructional feedback. Create a culture, create a climate for your group, but do it in collaboration with your athletes. Make considerations of gender, but more importantly, know your athlete, know the person who's in front of you, because some females are completely different to what the research says. Some males are completely different to what the research says. But hopefully this is just giving you food for thought in terms of just understanding some of those fundamental differences between the males and females, and therefore how you might adapt your coaching to be more effective. Right. Thank you very much, guys. And we are ready to take questions.
Fantastic. Excellent. I really enjoyed that presentation. As I kind of alluded to at the start of this, I'm a parent to daughters. So this actually is quite interesting in a personal concept outside of coaching. So that's really useful. And actually, I found myself actually quite a lot reflecting upon my own sort of coaching interactions with the various athletes that I've worked with previously, and I'm continuing to work with. And yeah, it gave me lots to think about. So we'll go through a few of the questions that we've got now. One from Keith here, which I think is also an interesting one. I think a lot of people probably think this. Does the menopause impact on female masters' emotional responses?
Oh, good question. I haven't worked with females going into the menopause that much. So without looking at the research, I wouldn't actually know. But my gut would say yes, because the menopause obviously changes the hormones, etc., around the body. So I'd have to look that one up and come back to you on that.
For sure, and the bit of evidence that I can give you, Keith, is my wife. Luckily she's not even here, so I'm okay. I can kind of mention this. She's just starting to go through the menopause, and yes, it does have an effect on the emotional responses. I can tell you that from a personal perspective.
Yeah. From a personal.
Does it need your defence on that one?
Yeah.
I'm way too open in my conversations. but yeah, and it's true. I think it is true, because I have detected that the conversations I have with my wife right now, there's a definite difference in emotional response that I would have had maybe a year and a half ago. So, I think that's going to go across all conversations you have generally. One from Sylvia. Hi, Sylvia. Always good to see you online. I think gender is important, but it isn't personality. The coach and the athletes are much more important. I guess.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And sometimes we fall into that, it's a female, it's a male, we've got to treat them differently. And actually we don't. It's just knowing the background information, but treating the person who's in front of you. So like I said, I'm very emotional, but I'm also very competitive. One of my friends has absolutely no emotion, and she's truly competitive, and the men absolutely hate running against her because they're like, she's so male. We're like, no, you can't say that. So I
That's
would
like my sort of girl.
yeah, exactly. You'd love her. So yeah, you coach the person in front of you rather than their gender. But there are gender areas to be aware of. If the athlete throws in a curveball and you're like, well, that's unusual. But yeah, just looking up the menopause one, yes, the emotions would very much be in there. So that's when to then be aware of that gender difference, for example.
And I guess what you're saying there, really, and I totally agree with what's been said here in terms of, you coach the athlete in front of you regardless of gender, but of course there are going to be different ways that maybe they process the information that we give out as coaches. So we may need to adjust our coaching style, which again is coaching the athlete in front of us, but we have to be aware that we may expect a different response depending upon the athlete's gender as well, and slightly. So yeah, it's quite on. There's no more questions at the moment. I think Mark was
I've got a question. One's a comment and one's a question, really. It struck me that a coach and an assistant could really help rather than having a one-stop shop, although it has to be a cohesive approach. You can't have an argument between the coach and the coach's assistant. But I've found that since I've started coaching recently with an assistant who we pretty much get on and we understand, that actually having the dual conversation with people, I might come unsurprisingly for some down a performance route, and he will then come from a much more of a softer approach, but we do meet in the middle and everybody gets what they want out of it, which sort of helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how to balance that kind of culture. So you've got, it just means that depending on how people are feeling, what type of athlete they are, they've then got options, they've got choice. And they know what they're going to get. So if they want that performance orientated, they come to you. If they need that, if they're on a day where they need a little bit more nurture, they can go to the other coach. When you're coaching alone, it's then how do you balance that so that you show your athletes you can have that nurture approach when needed, but you can also turn on the performance. And that's where the coaching is that kind of art sort of bit where you don't come across as inconsistent, but you do come across as approachable. So that sounds lovely.
Yeah. The other one, it was really a question around coercive power. In my own local group, we decided, this is the coach and the assistant bit again, decided to make the local county cross country a 3-line whip for the group. We're doing it.
Okay.
And the only reasonable excuse for not doing it is I'm injured, I'm ill, or I am really down the sprint indoor route.
Yeah.
Not that I don't want to do it. Now, would you say that that's an inappropriate use of coercive power? Because I'm saying we're here to compete. This is what we do. And this is an opportunity to compete where there are no entry standards available other than you just paying up your money and putting in the form. But when you said coercive power, I thought, I wonder whether I used it in the...
Yeah, I mean, the true sort of coercive people would argue that it wasn't, because there's no threat attached to it. So you haven't said, if you don't sort of do these, then I won't coach you anymore.
No, my question to them at the end of it was, well, if you didn't do them, do you really think that this is the right place for you to be? As you said in your presentation, I can certainly point you towards other groups. So we're not, throwing you into a hedge, but there's certainly, it would be like, why aren't you?
Well, yeah, this is a constant dilemma that particularly sort of voluntary clubs tend to have, because you need to get that balance between being a babysitting circle, because let's face it, if you can pay £2.50 to go down to a track, or you pay a babysitter £10.50 whilst you go off and do your own training, putting your kids in athletics can be a cheap option. And then if they don't support the club in terms of turning out for any kind of competition, you then have to think about, well, why are they there? You're the volunteer, potentially, putting in lots of effort. And so sometimes, I have heard it where clubs have said there's 3 races or 3 competitions a year that you have to compete in. Which competitions are completely up to you, but we are a competitive club. If you want to be a participation, go to this club or go down your local gym and just join in the fitness classes type thing. And so the coercion is where there's a threat. If you don't do 3, we will kick you out, kind of thing. But it's then that there's not a negative, and it can be more, this isn't the right place for you, this one is. So I think as long as you've got that balance of explain why you want them to do that particular race or series of races, and you say, if you don't, we will find you this, we've got something else lined up. So I know, for example, the club that said you've got to do these 3, if you don't, they then put you into this other club that's basically just a bit more
recreational. Yeah
exactly.
So the presentation actually made me think down the right lines, which is good. So yeah, that's all right then.